And did you put any money in, though?
Not
John?
a pound at that time.
So
None.
you got 50%.
Yeah.
They took all the risk.
Yeah.
And you didn't put any money in.
Yeah. There is thousands and thousands of 60-year-old men and women retired out of their business with another 25 years in life to go, bored out of their brains. They don't want to sit on boards, and they love to get actively involved in businesses. I think we were good at seeing trends, but what we're really good at was spotting people and building relationships. So every single business that I've ever been involved with was a guy came in, had a coffee, or I went for a pint with someone, and I listened to what they were talking about. We built that plan on 5 pages, how we were going to do it, who we were going to buy, what we were going to do, who do we need to bring in.
So where do you make your money in a hotel?
Find the best business in a market and emulate them.
Welcome to Billionaire Business. In this episode, we're going to look at 2 things. One is deal making. What makes some people really good at doing business deals? And then the second bit is, so how do you make money out of luxury hotels? Today, we want to talk to one of Ireland's most famous businessmen ever. One of the signs of a really great businessman is somebody who can make money in all sorts of industries. He's been in security, he's been in waste management, he's been in telecoms, he's been in luxury hotels, and he's had a success everywhere he's been. This is John Gallagher. Lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you guys, yeah.
John, before we kick off with the hotels, just give us an overview of what your sort of portfolio is today. And, you know, later on, we'll go back to lots of the other things that you've invested in and exited over the years.
Sure. I suppose we've transitioned, you know, so in my early careers, I was in businesses. So my whole focus was in building operational businesses. And as an entrepreneur, I think later in life, which we've all got to, you transition to in terms of moving away from the operational day-to-day of business and becoming more of an investor. It's a different skill set. And so the transition today, we'd be a portfolio of investments. So it still means we invest in operational businesses, but we'd have a large portfolio of prime assets in real estate, in hotels, in theaters, and in operational businesses. So we invest in things long-term, and our focus is really about low debt, high cash returns, and longevity. So it's a transition. If you ask me, would I think like that in my 20s and 30s? Absolutely not. I wanted something that made a lot of money in 6 months. And it was a different philosophy. You know.
But the chances are, if you walk around Dublin, you'll walk around some of you've got some big sort of commercial property investments in Dublin, right?
Yeah. Our views on life is that Dublin, you know, people diversify into different locations and different regions and different places. We tend to want to do business where A, we like, B, we like to stay, and C, we have confidence in the legitimacy of the law and how it's going to work and all that from a property point of view. So the main places we invested were primarily Dublin, because we know it backwards, and property is a local business. You need to understand every square foot of what you're looking at and the distance and location. And separately, London would be another place we have huge confidence in. And thirdly, believe it or not, was Poland. And why Poland? I picked up a book called The Next 100 Years, and in it said Poland will be the next Germany. Highly educated, 40 million people, don't have a recession, have fantastic infrastructure, and they'll be slow. You won't make a fortune overnight, but they'll be there for a very long time. So that was our slight diversification out of.
You've got a reputation as being one of the best deal doers ever, right? And I think people are fascinated to understand, how do you think about deals? If you look back at, without giving too much detail, you know, one of the really great deals that you did, take us through the thought process of how you spot something and then bring it to fruition.
I think for us is identifying a couple of things. I think the first thing is we would spend a long time on positioning something and also conditioning. In other words, we'd try and look at it from the other side.
What do you mean by positioning?
Well, what I mean by that is, for example, some large public companies often sell assets at very cheap values. Why? Because it's a policy decision at a board, at a PLC level. For example, they've made a decision overnight that they're out of something. And when you look at businesses, for example, like Live Nation was a good example, they made a decision one day overnight that they're out of theatres. And this is a long time before we ever got involved in theatres, but they just made a policy decision. And when a policy decision is made at a board, even though the management want to maximize the values, they want to do it at speed for the board. And often you can find phenomenal deals being presented to people at those times. The second condition is a market disruption. In other words, there is a lack of capital in the market, inability to sell, constraints, recessions, various different things that happen in a marketplace that present the opportunity where people have to divest of things for cash. And often there's an opportunity there. So we look for those slight disruptions. And if it suits us and we like what we're looking at, then we'll try and move on.
So I think I'm trying to pull the lessons from that, and I think there was at least two when I was listening. There was, when times are bad, some people have to sell stuff that they wouldn't necessarily want to, just because they need the cash.
Sure.
And the second bit, the number of buyers that are around are a lot less, which puts you in a much stronger position.
Yeah, I think that's true. Often people are fixated when they have a business and they're selling or buying a business as to what's the multiple going to be. Often I hear young people saying, oh, we'd hope we buy it at 5 or 6 times, we'd probably get 12 times multiple. And I'm not saying it really depends when you're selling it and the desire of the buyers to own that asset. So don't focus on multiples, focus on earnings, and also focus on timing. Because timing is a very, very important part of business that people forget about. So the best assets for me I ever bought were assets that I bought that I never intended to sell, were in great locations, whether they were businesses and backed by great people and management. And those businesses, the ones that I bought and I never intended to sell, turned out to be the most fantastic businesses and assets by default. And some of them were simple residential real estate I bought in prime locations, and I never intended to sell them. And they quadrupled in value. And the things I was so fixated on.
One of the famous deals that you did was with Anglian Water.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated to understand, you managed to persuade a big water company to give you 50% of the joint venture you put together. And you weren't that well known at that point, right? So just take us through roughly what happened, because that's a kind of dream of everybody to do.
Yeah, I mean, we know Ireland had a deficit in infrastructure, a significant deficit in waste and water. And we recognised that there was no Irish utility other than state utilities like the power companies, etc. And we knew that Ireland, from European funding, was going to go out and spend a hell of a lot of capital to improve their infrastructure. And we saw that as an opportunity. Now, naturally, we had no credentials to be at the table, never been involved in any of that types of businesses. But we did recognise one thing, that foreign companies coming into Ireland need local partners in some way. That was the first identification. The second thing is we could do things on the ground for them that they probably couldn't do themselves because of the scale and size of them. The trick for us was, how do we convince them that we're the right people? Because we didn't have anything. It was a £1 company. So every business,
a £1 company.
Well, it was
got
a
50% of the
yeah.
JV.
So the first project we won with them was a £350 million water infrastructure project for Dublin, and we owned 50%. It was a 20-year operational contract as well. So how we did that effectively was that the first thing we do in every business is you got to look the part. The first thing is look the part. So perception for us is sometimes 50% of a deal. So what we did was we contacted a guy called Joe Moran, who were the CEO and the finance director of the ESB Power Company. And we convinced them to come on a journey in a £1 company, which they thought was insane, but we said this is a great idea.
So ESB was the electricity
utility
base.
utility.
So he was a big cheese
so
in
these
in
guys
Irish
were
utilities,
these guys
yeah.
in
Yeah.
infrastructure terms were serious players, and they were joining a £1 company. And then we brought in a guy called Peter Sands from ABN AMRO Bank at the time, who was in infrastructure, and we went over to Anglian Water, and they presented for 3 or 4 hours to us about how big they were, what they'd done internationally. And then they asked me, would I like to talk about what we are doing and where we come. And thank God I was able to ask Joe to take that lead, and he dazzled them in terms of Ireland infrastructure, the future, what they've done in the power companies. the key thing, they didn't then get a chance to turn to me and say, John, what actually have you done?
Have you got any money, John?
Which was so. Perception is a funny thing, and that allowed us to get to the table, and we were able to convince them that we would be excellent partners. I think at the last minute they woke up to realize that A, they were giving us 50%, B, they were writing all the guarantees. In other words, the guarantee was 100% on them, not on us, if it failed as a guarantee. So we ended up with 50% of the business. And a funny
did you put any money in, though?
Not
John?
a pound at that time.
So you got 50%.
Yeah.
They took all the risk.
Yeah.
And you didn't put any money in.
Yeah.
You can't underestimate this from a business perspective. You were in the room with them all day, and you walked away at the end of that day with an agreement in principle.
Yeah.
And in those situations, I mean, this is a broader point, isn't it? Lesson in business, really. When you have those sort of meetings, I guess you've got to read the meeting to say, you know, a bit like the classic sales thing. If I stay too long, they almost change their mind. You know,
100%.
If they've shaken hands, best thing for me to do is to, you know, do a quick exit and get the plane back, right?
Yeah, the trick is confidence and being able to read the room. And, you know, sometimes I say about an Irish fella, the last thing on the way in is the reason he came in, you know. So, for example, Irish people are very good at reading a room, and sometimes they don't really say what they want initially. It's not that they're beating around the bush, it's they're trying to read what matters in the room, and that's very valuable. Sometimes you can come in and just set your own agenda, but you're not listening or trying to read the room. In the end, though, we did provide them with contracts for the end use of that water plant, which they never have achieved themselves. And we ended up getting 4 or 5 national contracts for them, which secured really the winning of that project. We knew we could do that, but they didn't. And really that was critical to them. So in terms of value, in the end, yes, they loved us as partners because we created value for them. You know?
What's interesting about this, though, is also you've done this variety of stuff. Right, you've been in waste management, you've been in water, you've been in telecoms. So you wouldn't class yourself as a sort of sector expert. You know, sometimes you have entrepreneurs who only know about telecoms and they just spend their whole career making money out of investing in telecoms businesses. So how do you know what a good deal is in a sector from that perspective?
I think what we've always used is no-nos. In every business we ever had, we always looked for people who were experts in that sector. And we would always bring them in incredibly early in every business we do. And people who've been there and done it, you know, people who are ex-CEOs. What people don't understand is there is thousands and thousands of 60-year-old men and women retired out of their business with another 25 years in life to go, bored out of their brains. They don't want to sit on boards, and they love to get actively involved in businesses.
Don't look at us.
I'm always amazed that all these young businesses I know, first place they don't go is there. They hire young people with no experience, and they think building business is all about energy and enthusiasm and speed. But if you don't have the intellect and the the real knowledge, you don't understand it, you know.
But I think what you were doing was spotting structural trends, because obviously Ireland's been this incredible boom story, and I think the GDP per capita in Ireland is now higher than the UK, right? So you know, now go back 30 years, would anyone have thought that could have happened? So you had this incredible boom in investment in infrastructure and all sorts of other things, and I guess you were more on a macro level. You were looking at that and saying, look, I can make money out of this. Because there's capital pouring into the country from, you know, the European Union or from Google or from whatever. Is that fundamentally what you were?
Yeah, I think we were good at seeing trends, but what we're really good at was spotting people and building relationships. So every single business that I've ever been involved with was a guy came in, had a coffee, or I went for a pint with someone, and I listened to what they were talking about. And, you know, I always think the trends are funny. They're subconscious. When they're in the conscious, it's already happened. So when you have a feel about something or just a hunch about something, that's a trend. That's something that's possibly going to happen. But when it's in the consciousness, it's kind of everybody's there already.
I think what's interesting there is I'm trying to contrast the way that you think about things and the way I do. I've spent my life in IT and telecoms, so I'm looking for which specific company do I want to buy, whereas to me it feels you're more like, I'm reading a newspaper, I'm watching the news. You're operating at a much higher level to say, what's about to happen next? And how do I get involved?
Yeah, I think that's a feel for us. It's yeah, in all the businesses I've been on, I didn't have, when I look at the game plan was written afterwards. In other words, we didn't know what was over the hill. If we built a business plan on the waste business, for example, myself and Peter Priestley built that plan on 5 pages, and how we were going to do it, who we were going to buy, what we were going to do, who do we need to bring in, and it was 5 pages on a sheet of paper.
And just to explain what it was, by the way, Joe, before we talk in detail, this was basically landfill, right?
Yeah,
it was just waste, basically.
So Ireland had not a properly regulated waste industry. It was basically holes in the ground owned by the government and a bunch of waste operators running around shoving it everywhere. So there was a clear opportunity to regulise that, professionalise it, and build a proper waste company. So we went in to look at the UK and what happened there, or the States, Waste Management International. We looked at BIFA, and we thought, why not Ireland? This seems so obvious. So the ability for us to get landfills the trick was everybody said you couldn't get landfills. Our approach on landfills, we got landfills because we told communities they were great. They weren't great for them. They were going to be a hassle. There were going to be problems. So when we built landfills, we built a tax to the community straight away. We said, you will get revenue out of this, and you will be part of this. You will need it in your region, but you will get revenue out of this. So we never tried to bully our way into to create something. And we were the only people to get 4 landfills in 4 provinces around the country. These things were the size of Wembley Stadium.
So the lesson there is get the community on side with you before you do it.
Yeah, and then what we did was we knew it was a commodity business. We built 4 landfills, and then we bought 25% of the waste stream. So we controlled both ends of the market, because we never want to be in that situation that the guy with the land of the blind, the guy with one eye is king. In other words, if you have the landfills and then somebody opens another landfill and you don't have the waste, then you compete for the waste. Whereas we want to make sure that from a longevity point of view, not only we control the end market for waste, but we're in the stream of waste, so we could control both ends of the market.
And what happened to that business, John?
So both of those businesses, we're in 50-50 with Anglian Water. We did a joint venture with NTR, which was in Tom Roach, who was married to my Bernie's sister, who was in electricity, wind farm businesses and toll roads. They had a phenomenally successful business, and they'd looked at waste. So they came in on 50% of the waste business, and I had Anglian on the water business. So we were always conscious. We had 2 50-50s with a holdco. So when you do that, you got to make sure who your buyers are. And in the end, I sold to NTR, then ended up having a waste business, a water business, roads and electricity. And I took half in stock and half in cash and became a shareholder of NTR. So that was,
So let's now change industries completely.
Yeah,
because the number of industries you've been in is remarkable. Luxury hotels is about as far away from waste as you're going to get, right? And there's lots of people in the world who think, I'd love to set up a hotel. What's the first thing that you consider when you're looking for another hotel?
Well, I think I'll talk to you from a commercial point of view, but there's an element I'll add to the end, which is you can't add. Very few people have it. And so when we look at it, I never want to own an asset that's in the centre of a city. Because on the provinces or on the peripherals, when land becomes cheap and you build a hotel, it's great when there's a boom market. When it's tough, everybody comes centre and you lose. So location obviously is important. But then segment and market. We don't believe, and we never have, that 2 people or 3 people can live out of one asset. So the concept of leases and ownership, whereby where they go asset light, is a nonsense. Because what happens is either the leaseholder does a phenomenal deal or the landlord does a phenomenal. Somebody gets screwed somewhere in the middle. So these things make 5 or 6% returns. If you make a phenomenal business out of them, it might make 10%. But think about that. So someone's making a 5.5% yield in the centre of London and 2 people are living at it. What are they actually getting in terms of that? So that there's a concept around leases and things. We're owners and occupiers.
So you want to own the freehold?
Right? We want to own the freehold because at times where, the income side is going fantastic, there are times when you need the asset side to grow. So it's a combination of both returns. So we would look at on hotels, certainly in the 5-star, it's the combination of the asset value growth over time plus the income growth inside the box. So if you think about a 3-star or 4-star, that's 70% of the return is in the cash and 30% is in the asset because it doesn't move very far because it's on the peripherals of the city or it's in a bad location. Flip it to the other side, you take somewhere like Marylebone, which would grow phenomenal on the asset side, but a low return on cash. So it's a long-term
So the lesson there
asset.
is, if you buy a cheap building, it's not going to grow in value very fast. If you buy an expensive building in a great location, over time, that will grow significantly.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting straight away, right? Because one of the things we're trying to understand is, so where do you make your money in a hotel? Is it rooms? Is it food? Is it alcohol?
Well, it's a combination. People used to say, and this is where I have to take my hat off to somebody like Bernie. So Bernie is my wife, and she's chairman of the Doyle Group, and she is a visionary, great sense of style, quality, architecture. So in simple terms,
I hope she's watching this.
Well, I hope she is. But she took the Marylebone and as an example, and that was an old Clifton Ford 4-star hotel. They owned it, fantastic hotel. But she had a vision for it, which was completely different. She needed the ground floor. She thought, I don't want to just earn out of bedrooms. I want to earn out of the excitement of the ground floor. I want to earn out of food. I want to earn out of bars. I want to earn out of gyms. I want people to feel really excited. I want to upsell. So her perception was that people are tired of staying in hotels where they come down and they'd rather stay in their rooms because there's nothing on the ground floor. There's no reason to be down there. Mm-hmm. So she had a vision which was to make them the center of their community. So the Marylebone is the center of Marylebone, and it dominates and owns that space. And every space you're in, which is in fairness to her, every part of that building you're in is in its own right a business. Like if you're on 108, you don't really know about the rest of the hotel. You're in the restaurant, or if you're in the third space in the gym, you're in that space. So she created businesses within businesses in terms of driving the overall context of the business. So her view would be, we're in the entertainment business, we're not in hotels. So that vision that's what the driver is. So yeah, come back to what should you make of money in hotels. Old school hoteliers would think, I got to make it in bedrooms. That's all you make it in. The rest is, they make no money on food, money. Modern hoteliers see it as all about the experience. It's all about, how do I upsell? How do I create value? How do I make money out of restaurants? They treat every part of their business as a separate business. And that's the difference.
So let's do the expensive building bit. I'm a young guy who wants to set up a hotel. How do I find the money to buy something that expensive? Is it easy to finance expensive buildings like that?
I think the reality is debt is always reasonably easy on hotels. So it is
because it's a physical building.
Yeah, because it's a physical building, and banks like that, and they also like the fact that it has an operational asset. Unlike an office, where you could lose a tenant at the end of 7 years or 10 years, and you got nothing.
Does that mean you get longer term loans?
Well, you do, because when you think about it, is you're your own tenant, and you're always going to be paying your rent to yourself. So there's a great operational value to that. The second thing, in my view, is when things turn into an inflationary environment, when you have operational assets, you have the ability to chase the inflation alongside it, at least keep hold of it. Rents are very different in offices. Sometimes you can't get that back for 7 or 8 years if you're locked in. Whereas an operational asset like a hotel, provided, like, I would not like to be in the 3-star or 4-star market at the moment, because my rates are capped and my costs are rocketing. Whereas we're in 5-star, we have elasticity on rate. So we can keep pushing the rate depending on the cost base that's coming through. Now, there may be a glass ceiling to that. Nobody knows yet.
It's interesting, though, because you've got, 6 hotels in the collection, or these are all...
There's 8. I mean, there's 3 in London alone. Then there's 1 in Dublin,
one in Cork. In Dublin, right?
1 in Cork, yes. 1 in Bristol. 1 in Washington, yeah.
And you want to own the freeholds.
Yeah.
You've taken these hotels. If you take the Marylebone as an example, people may not, I'm sure not everyone will know the building, but it's a sort of, in a beautiful part of London, highly sought after part of London. It's a sort of, if you don't mind me being disrespectful, it's a fairly ordinary 1960s sort of block.
Yeah.
But you've turned it into this beautiful sort of hotel environment. When you were doing that, because previously it was a sort of fairly average 4-star hotel, right? You took a bit of a risk, right, in terms of, did you know it was going to come off or work?
I think there's two sides to it. One is I don't think Bernie felt it was a risk because, and certainly we didn't either, because our view was that we had a 4-star asset sitting in a 5-star location. That's criminal in itself.
Is that the big lesson? That the one of the things that you look for is the real prime locations should have prime hotels. And if you find a 3 or 4-star hotel in a prime location, that's a great target for you.
Oh, 100%. I mean, the perfect target for us is to find a 3-4-star hotel with no money for capex, having been invested in for 10 years in a 5-star location, or what will be a 5-star location.
Yeah.
So, what they did to the Kensington was exactly that. It was off the peripheral. It was Kensington, it was Queensgate and Brompton, and they took a great building and they elevated it to make it a destination. But it takes vision. I mean, what Bernie has on that side is she has the vision, and that's really, in the hotel world, that's the part you can't buy, and you can't even bring designers in. It will work, but it doesn't really work.
And what works in terms of hotels as a sort of, in the consumer environment in probably a fairly tough economic climate? I mean, is it sort of you either go budget or you go 5-star, and the bit in the middle is the bit that's really squeezed, or is it quite a tough environment even for 5-star hotels at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the city. Like Dublin, but people didn't understand Dublin. I saw Dalata being taken private by Pandox, and a lot of the bidders didn't understand. For example, when they're looking at Ireland, they thought, oh God, Ireland, there's too many hotels, or maybe there's overpriced, or maybe the market's too high. Well, they missed the point. Dublin is one of the only cities that most hotels belong to Dalata were utilitarian. In other words, they're sitting beside the Three Arena, or they're sitting beside the Conference Centre, or they're sitting beside the Aviva Stadium. Dublin is one of the only cities that has the stadiums in the middle of the city, or they're sitting beside the RDS. So they just feed off those giant pieces of infrastructure. So if you're in the 4-star business in Dublin, great place to be, my God. 4-star in London, different ballgame. You have to create some environment for people who want to be there. So it's got to be 4-star lifestyle or cheap budget. That's where you got to be, or you got to be at the 5-star, level. But if you're in the 5-star business, which a lot of private equity firms don't understand, it's a capex arms race. So unless you can keep your hotels to pristine condition, your race will collapse very, very quickly. And private equity think they should be in hotels, but it's the complete wrong business for them because it's a long-term business.
See, that's interesting because a long time ago, I met Billy Whitbread from when the family that owned all the pubs, and he said to me, very self-deprecating, the only thing I know about pubs is this: if I refurbish them every 3 years, I'm bankrupt, and if I refurbish them every 7, I make money. And he'd kind of boiled his business plan down to as simple as that. Is there a danger that perpetual capex means that you never make any cash?
No, I think the real great hoteliers, it's like us with the theatre. If your business isn't making enough to pay for its own capex, it isn't a business. Either
Correct.
you should be out of it. You shouldn't be in it. Like in the theatre in Dublin, we spend $1 million a year on just standard capex every single year, but we spend it every year. We don't wait, if that was owned by a private equity firm, they'd spend 100 grand, 200 grand. They'd wait 7 or 8 years, wait for the place to be downtrodden, wrecked, and then they flog it on to somebody else, got to come in and spend 10 million. So it's the truth of owning those kind of assets. You look at the Scandinavians or the Swedes or the Norwegians, they couldn't imagine not keeping what they own in prime condition. They'll refurbish chairs, they'll sew things, they'll repaint, they will have the place. It's like an old car, a vintage car. It will look as beautiful today as it was 10 years ago. Private equity or short-term capital never get that. And it's alien to them, and they find it very difficult to spend that kind of capital. But if you have a business in a hotel that isn't making enough to pay for its proper capex per year, which isn't 3%, which everybody tells you, it's probably about 6% of turnover.
But you have to also have that passion, don't you? I mean, if you take, Bernie, take Rocco Forte as an example, famous hotelier. You have to be in that building. Yeah, but very regularly. Yeah. You have to care about whether the loos have been cleaned every half hour.
Yeah, well, Bernie would walk into a hotel and in 2.5 minutes she'd know there's something wrong. I mean, she'd walk into the Westbury Hotel in Dublin. She'd call the manager over and say, "There's a problem here. The place is just team full of people out of the retail and hairdressing trade. Not that there's anything wrong with them. It looks like it's just party time in the foyer. The guests can't come down. They can't get chairs. They can't. She'd see it in seconds. And so it's in your blood. Hoteliers are peculiar like that. Yeah.
This is you as an investor. Clearly, I don't think you started with loads of money. Can you go back to the start? Right. How did you get going as a young man?
I left in very early 80s in 1980 from college. And the great thing about Ireland was there were no jobs. So careers and opportunities were very short. You either got on a plane and you went to London, or you started a business, or you got a job. And the jobs that were available to us were pretty limited. So I read on the front of a paper and one day in the afternoon that every building in Dublin had to have a security system, otherwise it couldn't be insured, and a fire system. I thought, that's a great business. So I got in touch with Philips in Holland it was, and I got an agency for Philips alarms, DIY. So I rang every doorbell in every housing estate in Dublin, and I sold loads of those DIY alarms. The only problem was
cold calling and door knocking. That's what you're doing.
The best way to learn sales. And the funny thing about it was within about 3 weeks, my phone was rammed. My home phone, because I was using the phone at home, was phone calls saying Irish fellas just can't put in things. They didn't know how to work. So I hired an electrician, and that was the start of the business. So we built that business into the largest security and fire business in Ireland, and then we bought Thorny and Mye's business in Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. And that became, we dominated. And the simple truth about that, if I was being honest, was I just said, who's the biggest and best in the business? Let's copy everything they do. And that was Chubb. My brochure looked like Chubb's. I only one job, but my photographs were extraordinary. My contracts were Chubb's contracts.
That's a massive lesson to people. Right. People seem to think you have to reinvent the wheel all the time. Why?
Find the best business in a market and emulate them. Do everything they do. And Chubb, even down to the contracts, I think we copied their contracts at the beginning. And I think one or two of our clients spotted the fact that said Chubb in a couple of places. But that was how simple it was for us. It was called Magnum because it was a short, fat sort of name like Chubb. People had heard before. The logos were very similar. And we present ourselves into the marketplace as Chubb. Effectively, we were called Magnum. And we looked at biz and we present ourselves as though we had been around for years. And that's
what's fascinating about this, though, and you said it at the beginning, it's about perception of you, isn't it? Which is so important in deals.
Yeah.
So you sort of, and this is where great entrepreneurs sort of jump off the plateau. They go up to a next level. So you sort of presented yourself as perhaps a bigger business than you were.
Much bigger, yeah.
And then you're ringing up some of the biggest corporates in Ireland, selling them fire alarms, basically.
Yeah.
How did that go?
Well, I there was one particular business, won't name them, but a fantastic business. We were trying to get all the retail business, and they're a very large company. And I rang the CEO. I got his number, and I rang him, and I said, listen, I would love to have a chat with you about the security system tender for one of the shopping centres. And there was a couple of expletives down the phone, and he said to me, who gave you my number? I couldn't tell him. And the second thing he said to me, do you think I deal with the security alarm systems? I'm the CEO of this company. You need to ring a guy called Sean Kavanagh. He slammed the phone down on me. And I picked the phone up. I rang the place again, asked for Sean Kavanagh. I said, I was just talking to your CEO. And he said, you're the guy to ring. And he said, please come in and talk to me on Monday. And we got every system, every security system, every fire system, everything they had. He didn't ask me the key question, did I actually know the CEO? Which I didn't. But they became fantastic partners for us. So it goes back to that thing of, perception. It was the same thing with Anglian Water. It was how we presented ourselves. And in every business we go into, we always bring in people who've got that gravitas and who have legacy. If you don't have the legacy and you don't have the credentials and you don't have the history in your business, the next best thing is find the personalities that do and surround yourself with them. And then you look like a business.
So what did you do next after that one? Because you've done all sorts of things.
After the security was, from the security, I went to sell that business, and the guy I sold it, the transaction lawyer on the far side of the table was a guy called Peter Precy, and he said, what are you going to do next? And I said, I'm going to go into infrastructure. I think it's a great idea. And he said, really? And I said, yeah. So he was the transaction lawyer for Chubb, and he did the transaction. And he rang me 3 weeks later and said, can I come and work for you? And I said, but I just sold you my business. And he said, yeah, I know, but you had that infrastructure idea, so I'd love to come and work for you. So he came over, and that's how we built the business. And after we sold that to NTR, we built both those businesses in a matter of 3 or 4 years. And then there were very large companies there. And then we sold them to NTR. And thereafter, that was the genesis of Crownway. So therefore, thereafter, I decided I need to be more of an infrastructure, at capital, and I needed to be more of an
Crownway is your investment fund?
Investment business. So it became a
How did you
transition.
find that change? Because the running around entrepreneur and the investor, is that very different?
Very different. So all the skill set, that I had as an entrepreneur, ADHD, speed, transactions, great at relationships, it's all movement, it's all speed. And when you have no capital, that's what you need to do to build businesses. But the difficulty with that is when you're investing capital, it's completely different. So you're then in the Warren Buffett mode. You're analytical, you're slow, you're considered, and you need to apply those skills to whatever you're investing in terms of capital. Because most entrepreneurs often earn a lot of money and then lose it because their instinct is to get going.
Well, they invest it in the wrong things.
Well, take a punt and throw money into things, and they find themselves in 10 businesses quickly before they know where they are. So I surrounded myself with Joe Marr, Peter Priestley, naysayers, so we'd meet if we want to do a transaction on a Friday and we'd have done the usual amount of work, we'd have a board meeting, we say, there's a great deal, we've done all the work, ready to transact. And he'd say, fantastic. He'd read the papers. He'd say, that looks great, John. Fantastic. Let's meet again next week on Tuesday and kick that around again. And invariably, Tuesday, Wednesday, we'd spot something that we never spotted before.
Do you turn a lot of deals down? I mean, what's your ratio of things that you look at and things that you do?
Oh, I'd say we look at, 30 things and we might do one, so, but we, usually it comes down to, being honest with you, it comes down to individuals. If we find people or things which we like the people in, we tend to be able to build businesses or do things with those people. And that's a big factor for us, even within the team. It's really about, relationships. We invested in a new business called Claris, which is basically AI-centric consultancy in doing it slightly different, a challenger brand. But we were looking at this until we found a guy you called Frank O'D, and Frank ran EY and built a very large consultancy business. And when I met Frank, I knew in 15 minutes, as did Peter, that this was the guy. In everything about him, no big ego, just organized guy, normal, good fun, which is really important for us. The fun part of business and the humor part, it's not there. There's no point in doing it. And that's what we tend to get involved with, people that we actually say.
See, I love that bit, because one of my questions always used to be, do I want to spend the next 5 years of my life with this person?
Yeah.
Or am I going to be bored to death? Because we only live once. At the end of the day, you've got to enjoy it. What was fascinating there, though, was you said, most people would expect you to say about business plans, and you didn't say numbers, you said people.
Yeah. I always, all the business plans I've seen in my life never come true. Everybody can do business plans. Usually there's a set of directions and circumstances, and then you basically build a plan around that, and then you build the what ifs. That fails. Do we need more capital? How much capital do we need? How do we get that? What happened if that happened? What we were very good at, and I suppose when I look back, where did that come from? Risk was always on my agenda because I was in the business of risk. So we would always spend 80% of our time on the risk downside of something than the upside. So we'd exhaust ourselves of what could go wrong. People, organizations, what could come at us from outside, besides the business might be sound, might be in the great area, but what could happen to us outside, externally, regulatory-wise, environment-wise, economic-wise, what could come and kick us? And most businesses fail not because of one thing going wrong, but 2 or 3 things going wrong at the exact same time. And we're always saying to ourselves, and that brings us back to the debt side, we're very careful with debt. because if the yardstick we use is if the debt will ever make us make the wrong decision for the business, then we have too much debt.
It's such a great set of lessons, John. Don't have too much debt, as you say. Pick the right people. You don't need to start with millions and millions of pounds.
No.
To back a trend, perception, sell yourself. What would your advice be? People who are watching this who are thinking, actually, I'm really inspired by this conversation, right? I don't need to have made millions and millions to start and do deals. What would your advice be to them?
I think my advice in relation to is business is long. That's the first thing is don't try and do something in a month or a year or 6 months. A lot of the young people today, it's driven by the tech world. They want to have unicorns in a year and a half. Great businesses are incremental. They're time, they're surrounded, and they should be fun, and they should be long-term. So my view on it is, number one is surround yourself with people who've been there and done it. Whatever you're looking at, whatever industry, and they're the cheapest labor you'll ever bring in. You hire a CEO, it might cost you a couple of $100,000. You can bring in the person who's run a major company for 25 grand a year. They just sit there. The best lesson I ever got in business was I couldn't get on the insurance list in the security world to get the big jobs. Group 4, Secure Core, and Chubb got them all. And the reason was, on the insurance list, if you had a very large building, you had to be on that list to get the job. So they'd all say, sorry, John, you're not on the list. So I put an ad in the paper for somebody in the insurance world or somebody who could sell to the insurance world. Take me a year and a half, 2 years to get on that list. And unfortunately, I was young and I didn't have the money, so the salary I put on was too low. No one applied. And my secretary rang me and said, from upstairs, said, there's a guy downstairs who's interested in the job. And he'll come up to you. And I said, great. She said, he'll be a while. And I said, what do you mean while? He said, very old. So anyway, this guy came around. He was 70 years of age. He came down and thought, oh my God, this is a disaster. So I said to the guy, thanks very much. I said, this is about knocking all the doors of sales of the insurance companies. Get me on that list. It might take a year or two. And it's sales, can't you drive? And he said, no, I don't drive, at all, So I said, what would make you think you could do the job? And he said, well, I was president of the Insurance Corporation of Brokers, and I ran Coyle Hamilton, the largest brokerage company in insurance. I said, why would you do this? He said, I'm just bored out of my brains. I'm sitting at home in the garden. I don't know what to do. I saw a little company. I thought, I could help them. Within 6 weeks, I was on every insurance list. And I never forgot that lesson.
What a great story.
And he cost me practically nothing.
Well, we're very reasonable, by the way, John. I just wanted you to know that. But
well, now you know.
Can I finish with one?
Final question.
Final question, right. This is a fascinating conversation. I mean, you've made money in so many different sectors. What excites you, 2 or 3 sectors for, say, the next 5 years or 10 years? Where would you look next if you were a younger man?
Well, I think, for example, regardless of what's happening in AI, for me, the biggest asset in the world today is human capital. And I look at that, and I also look at the amount of human capital that's come out of businesses that will last another 25 years and don't want to retire. So pluralist careers is the future. The concept of output in the old days was based on an hour. In other words, what could you output? People did X amount of hours. That was the measurement of output. The measurement of output in the future is the output itself. And you might be able to do something in a day that takes somebody else 7 days. And maybe you should be paid the same level for 7 days as 1 day. So it's thrown the whole concept of human labor up in the air. So that's why we invested in the Claris thing, which is about human capital. It's about harvesting that network of brilliant people, all the no-nos I was talking about, bringing them back into the workforce
so it's an expert network
to develop businesses. But on top of that, sidelining that with brilliant consultancy around AI. Because I think I wouldn't like to be in AI companies because I wouldn't know which one to pick. But a friend of mine, Steve McIntyre, owns Frontline. We're looking at where's the money going to be made out of AI. We think it will be made on the people who make the applications inside the businesses. So in other words, they will take AI and they'll apply it to a specific problem to resolve a specific problem, like Harvey in the legal profession. It won't be made by all the AI companies out there. Yes, some of them will win, some of them will lose. It won't be made by the data centers because that'll be a gold rush. It's like the old days with the broadband. Everybody started laying broadband all over the place on the belief that the stuff was going to come down the pipe, and everybody went bust. 10 years later, they were great assets. Data centers, all the big AI companies and Amazon, all these people saying, we need tons of data centers. And everybody's going to rush out and build a pile of data centers. And then they say, well, actually, we only need half of them. So the application of AI, I think, is an interesting space. Real estate, the world has changed. Today, I'm nervous of real estate because it costs more to build a building than the value of a building. So if you take a building, the Marylebone, valued at, say, 180 million, to build the same building around the corners, nearly 300 million. That makes no sense. So cost of inflation of labor, there's a big
construction pricing.
Construction pricing
it's gone through the roof.
Has altered the concept, and the human inflationary of what people are prepared to pay for that asset hasn't caught up. So you build a 300 million pound, your return's going to be 1 or 2% for years and years and years and years. So we like businesses that are sticky, long term. Great people. There's a moat around them. We always look for things. There's a bit of a moat around something, and that's what excites us.
Every time I say last question, I have to do another one.
No problem.
Because that's a really important lesson for people to learn. Give us an example of what you mean by a moat.
Well, a moat can be a series of things. Like, for example, a moat is often somebody who's got embedded into a bunch of customers. So in the old world 10 years ago, people say, you got a piece of widget or a technology that take years to build, or you have secret sauce or things like that. People break those things every day of the week. Technologies are flipped on their heads every day. I wouldn't like to own a business that relied on that. What I love is businesses that are embedded, have great customers, but have embedded themselves into those customer base. That's a moat. It's very hard to pull someone out of a customer base if they're doing a half decent job, I love businesses that have recurring income. In other words, I don't have to sell you something every day new. That's tough. What we loved about the security business was we owned the client, and the client paid us recurring maintenance every single year. He needed us every quarter. We had to do our checks, our maintenance. So we love businesses that have continual recurring income. I suppose the last part we always watch for is the business so reliant on the people in the business that they are the business? So I'm always extremely careful. So when I look at businesses as well, there's a friend of mine owns a business, and people think it's a shipping business, but they don't really understand it. It's called ICG. It's run by one of the best business and entrepreneurs in Ireland called Eamon Rotwell. But he owns Irish Ferries. It's a utility. You can't get off our island without his boats. So he owns transportation out of Ireland. There's one or two competitors, but he has all the ports. You talk about slots of Ryanair. He has the slots. So if I'm investing in his business and, you get a 10 or 15% return, I'm thinking to myself, pension companies would buy that for a 4%, 5% return. But people don't recognize it because they just see it as a shipping business. So we look at things and say, what's the dominance of that particular business in that particular area and why? And they're the things that attract us to invest in those things.
I mean, it's been a masterclass, to be honest, talking to you. Lots to take away and think about. The good news for us is we do have a future, Ian.
Oh, yeah.
So, very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Old people paid lots of money.
I think it's the future. Yeah.
Well, John, it's been terrific. Thanks very much for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Cheers.
Not at all.
Ian, John Gallagher was a sort of masterclass in deal making, but he doesn't fit into some of the boxes that we've had with other guests in this series who tend to have been relentlessly focused on an industry like retail, for example. John's been across multiple different industries. What's the common ingredient?
I was sat there trying to work that out all the way through. And I think he's a big picture guy. You can always see when he's reading a newspaper or he's watching the TV, he's constantly trying to spot what's the trends and how do I get involved. So, he spotted that very early in his life, Ireland was going to get stronger on fire alarms and security, so he went into that. When Ireland joined the EU, he sat down and said, what are we going to have to change to get up to EU standards? And that led to the waste management deal. If you look at after COVID, he then looked at who's struggling. I could possibly buy it cheap. So he thinks on a different level to the rest of us, I think.
He does, but I think he's also very, very good at deal making, isn't he? And you can take some great lessons because, particularly early in his career, deal making was about salesmanship. It was about perception because people didn't know who John Gallagher was. And he was able to convince people to work with him, some of the most senior people in the industries he was involved in, and he could win deals. And he also knew, which is great skill, when you've got the deal, leave the room. Don't carry on talking. Take the deal and leave the room. Don't get bogged down in legal detail, etc. You've won the deal.
I love the way he described it as perception and positioning. If you look at some of his most successful deals, like the big water one that he did, he didn't really have much of a company. There was just him and somebody else, but he surrounds himself with the most famous people in that industry. He'd hired the top energy infrastructure guy, so they had enormous credibility around the table, even though there was nothing really behind that.
And one of the interesting things about John is sort of, a period through his career, he's transitioned from being an entrepreneur to a fund manager. He's now sort of managing investments. And that's a very different skill, right?
That's easy for entrepreneurs to forget because you think that everybody thinks like you. Investors don't think like you; they think differently, right? So it was interesting to see somebody do that because he's quite dispassionate now, isn't he?
He's very analytical. He's very dispassionate. He's very analytical. But I have to say, I think John is around for the long term.
Yeah, and I think part of it is because he does deals and then works out how to get his money back straight away. If you look at that hotels deal that he did, he saw that after COVID, when there'd been no travelling, a lot of hotels are really struggling, particularly if they borrowed money. He bought them cheap, and then when it turned round, he sold a chunk of them and got all his original money back. So now he's got some massive five-star hotels that effectively he's got for free.
It's a great combination of skills, I have to say.
It's a great strategy.